Hi, Eliza. Welcome. Welcome from Berlin to Singapore. So good to have you here today.
Thank you, Holger. I'm delighted, to be part and parcel of this Berlin Change Days.
Eliza, I'm so excited that you and your husband, Sir John Biddleston, will come to Berlin, and we'll expect you leading a workshop on leadership and cultural transformation and three types of organizations. And obviously, we talk more about the content of this workshop a little bit later, but I'm really excited to have you two people here in Berlin in November.
Right. Thank you very much, Holger. We are really looking forward to it and to meeting everyone and to actually participating and stimulating in a great exchange on ideas from around the world.
We met a couple of years ago, and we have worked together in very different organizational and cultural setting. I remember that we worked together in Kuala Lumpur one time, and we also worked in Mumbai, so that was a great collaboration. So I'm really looking forward to your inputs because I know you're very experienced in business development in Asia, but also beyond. So if I can ask you some very short questions at the beginning, which will stimulate our dialogue, and I'll ask you to reply to those questions very briefly. So the first question would be, do we need new organizations?
I think organizations will continue to evolve because they require agility to survive.
Okay, so what about leadership? Why do we need leadership?
Because the world is volatile, and as a result, you need leadership in order to help navigate and provide people with some kind of stability amidst volatility.
Okay, and the third question is, what about collaboration? Why do we need collaboration?
Because of complexity. I think at the end of the day, with increasing complexity, people need to support people in order to be able to execute strategy.
Thank you. Eliza, let's come a little bit to the topic of your workshop, leadership and cultural transformation and three types of organizations. And as we have discussed before when we prepared that workshop, you talked about three different types of organizations. The one are family-owned businesses, the other one are publicly listed multinationals, and the third one are government-linked organizations which operate in geographically diverse parts of the world. I'm very curious to know more about your topic, and I expect that you also will approach your topic from an Asian perspective, but probably not leave it at that.
No, I think the idea is I would like to have a session where people come to have a learning community. That's the climate I want to build in the workshop. And the idea is for each one of the highly professional people coming from all over the globe to really examine the issues and challenges that are driving cultural transformation in these three types of organization. And the idea is that these three organizations are distinct, they're different, they face different challenges. I will be sharing examples from Asia, of course, and I would encourage participants attending to share their experience of what it's like, example, to work with family-owned businesses in Africa, in the rest of Europe, in America, Latin America, etc. So that will be really the key thing of trying to understand what's the kind of issue that's driving cultural transformation, and also what the implications are for the leaders and the OD and HR community as a result of it, and to exchange kind of best practices and ideas and stimulus on different strategies and approaches to helping these organizations in their cultural transformation.
Okay, let's deconstruct a bit those organizations. So let's start with the first category, family-owned businesses. What's the particular challenge of cultural transformation in family-owned business, and particularly from an Asian perspective?
Well, the challenges are really, at the end of the day, the next generation, because family businesses are often founded on the basis of the entrepreneurial values of the founder, their philosophy and their vision. And I think increasingly, as they get successful, there's also a legacy of philanthropy and much longer term view. So for me, the strength of the family businesses, if they're not publicly listed, is that they can afford a long term view. And as a result, I'm sure that these are common issues right across the globe. For me, the research shows that really looking at the succession planning is really key to the whole thing. And it's about stewardship and sustainability of family assets. And we will be sharing examples of Indonesian, Singaporean, and Thai business families because, there's evidence of the search for a long-term view of success in their family, and how, as a result, they balance non-family membership and advisors on their board, how they provide mentorship for the next generation, and what the transitions are, given the business cycle as well as the different geographies that they operate in.
Well, obviously we have a lot of family-owned businesses in Europe as well, particularly in Germany, in northern Italy. And there is a kind of saying in Germany which says the first generation founds the company, the second one expands it, and the third one breaks it down, it ruins it. Is that also the experience you have in Asia?
That's what they say. But, increasingly I'm quite hopeful because the new generations are actually educated. So the advantage is that there is a strong emphasis on education, a strong recognition that the young, can and should work outside their organizations before coming on board. So I think that itself is useful because a lot of their very educated younger leaders coming into the business really, would have greater exposure outside. But guess what? It comes back to politics. It comes back to basic familial relationships. So if you want to talk about, what stands in the way, it's really at the end of the day, family politics. And the question is, in Asia particularly, what is family? Because family is really about extended families. And you get in-laws and, the rest of the extended family of the in-laws actually involved in businesses. And sometimes that creates a lot of hassle.
What's the specific challenge of OD practitioner like us to work in such environments?
Well, for one thing, we contribute in terms of helping the organization look at ways of sustaining itself in the long term, and that includes talent development, but they are also looking for, growth. And in Asia, they're very bullish. About 70% of the family-owned businesses are very bullish about expanding within Asia, looking for new markets, looking for new lines of business. They have to look at mergers and acquisitions, and from an OD viewpoint, this is where cultural transformation occurs. How do you actually help people adjust to a family-owned structure? And when they buy and acquire other companies with other cultures, how do they actually make the various cultures work? Unless the family foundation has very strong values, that itself will be like a Sam Walton in Walmart, for instance. But I think in the Asian context, because some of the ways the smaller family firms grow, it's really in terms of conglomerate. So I'm not really sure that they're very strong on the culture. So I think it will be providing, advice, sounding board on what kind of culture, helping them to identify what the cultures are, how strong they want the cultures to be, how flexible, and how they are going to be able to handle the M&A opportunities that come from it. Plus, at the same time, I think many of these companies understand the need for R&D and innovation as well. So we have really exciting times working with SMEs or family kind of based organizations in Asia, helping them grow from a small business enterprise right through to international firms.
Let's move to another category, and probably some of the issues are similar, which are the government-linked organizations that go across border, that work in other parts of Asia or even in Europe. Can you first give me some examples of such organizations and then talk about the specific challenges?
Sure. Now, interestingly enough, the research says there's no single definition to what government-linked organizations are. Some are called GLCs, which are government-linked companies. Others are called, state-owned enterprises. They include companies like the parastatals or PERSEROs. So there are many, many ways you can call these organizations. But I think what comes through the whole issue is this. What is the role of government as a competitor or enabler or facilitator? Because they are actually undertaking commercial activities. So you've got this paradox. On one hand, government can compete as much with the private sector as at the same time enabling them. you've also got the issue of natural monopolies. Example, they tend to function in the areas of infrastructure which is needed for economic development. So you get lots of rail, telecoms, natural resources, energy, strategic goods and services like mail and weapons, which are politically sensitive, and broadcasting and healthcare. And then there's another part of it, which is really about sovereign wealth funds. And that, goes with the SWF would be involved in funding a lot of mergers and acquisitions and international expansion. So it's very interesting about what one thinks about the traditional role of government, and really effective governments are able to balance the paradox of providing service with profits. And at the same time, they using the taxpayers, money for value-add contributions by making sure that their organizations are competitive and actually making profits. So I think for me, it is really interesting. The issues for OD is really about reform and also helping some of the government organizations become much more transparent. So it's about transparency at the end of the day.
And I assume that affecting this culture change, which you just described, is a huge task, because it's difficult in any organization to affect cultural change, but particularly in those organizations like, on the one side, family-owned companies, but also this governmental organization, which all might have a kind of company culture which worked for a while and made them successful, but now they're coming to a point where they need different values, different behaviors. It comes back to the three words we had before, the catchwords: leadership, new organizations, collaborations. So totally different employee behaviors, and in particular management behaviors. I can imagine that it's particularly difficult under such circumstances to work with middle managers who are used to a certain company culture. They found their way through, they were promoted based on the old company culture, and now suddenly they are required to change. That must be quite a challenge for people like you working in such organizations.
Well, and at the same time, it's also really meaningful. So, example, if you look at China, and for me, I'm hoping that at the conference we will hear from our colleagues in Europe, working perhaps with Russian, state-owned enterprises, with even Deutsche Post, for instance, in Germany, right? Traditionally, government-type organizations. The transition, to become a privatized organization and much more entrepreneurial, much more innovative, that's just a bit of, some of the issues that they are facing. But for me, if you're looking at China, for instance, and I'll be sharing some, research on China, the issue is how do you balance economic reforms with job creation? How do you actually spread economic development much more evenly across China? Because we know, for instance, that the bigger the gap between the rural poverty and the fantastic millionaires and billionaires that you have in the special economic zone in Shanghai and the centers of excellence, that actually creates social problems, right? So the government in this role has to balance, on one hand, economic development, productivity challenges, profitability, run it like any other corporation, and yet there's a social value to it. So it's a slightly different thing. And when you think about it, how do you actually help in China 260 million poorly educated, underskilled rural residents, and how do they actually fit a value-added, knowledge-driven economy? So in itself, it's a massive question for the government. At the same time, you have this paradox of productivity, do more with less, greater reliance on technology and innovation, yet at the same time, you have to create jobs. And the third other area, particularly for China, are the social issues: food and water security, pollution, corruption, how to give access to high-quality education and healthcare. These are the challenges facing China and the complexity, and I would really welcome colleagues who can tell us and share with us stories about their challenges in other parts of the world, dealing with South America, dealing with Europe, and dealing with Africa when they're dealing with huge parastatals. What the issues are for those countries, I think it would be fantastic. And I'm really looking forward to learning from our colleagues.
I'm intrigued, Eliza, about the depth and the broadness of your view on these issues, and I'm really excited to have you. And John, by the way, your husband John, an American/English entrepreneur who lived 25-30 years in Singapore, so he has a very broad global perspective. So very much looking forward to have John with us also. And looking at all these challenges that you described, if we could have a little, if we pick a boo into your toolbox, if we can have a little view into how do you work with these clients? For example, how do you work with the family businesses? What is what you do when you go there? And I'm sure we'll talk more about that when you're in Berlin.
Of course. Like any other good OD principle, and that's universal, you start where the client is. In other words, you do not go in with any set ideas or answers, but purely going in there and do nothing but empty your mind in the very Zen-like fashion, and you listen, ask and listen and learn. I think are the key things that you and I have been working together on for a client, and I use that as a piece of advice. So you start where they are, and depending on where they want. Example, with an Indonesian client, it's very interesting. I've got a colleague who's working straight to the chairman. There are politics and political tension between the father and the son, and he's actually said to the son, do not expect to automatically inherit my kingdom, because until you prove yourself worthy, I'm not necessarily going to hand it over to you. He has a daughter that he has put in charge of a foundation, and that is his legacy to the Indonesian society. At the same time, he has a vision that he would like to introduce a kind of executive education development for his people and the leadership. So you start off with, this is where he's at. He's built a business. He's managed to transform it from the roots, which were really in tobacco, and growing and distribution. And he's got out of the tobacco industry. He's now into the rest of the agri products, palm oil, fisheries, that kind of stuff. And as a result, the issues are very different. So in his case, it's really about talent succession planning. It is about talent development. So that would be one example. I have another client in Malaysia, and this time it is the GLC. This is, again, the equivalent to Temasek Holdings in Singapore, which is, basically a huge sovereign wealth fund, organization that invests in everything else. And in the Malaysian, situation, it was the call came from HR, and the idea was, how can we as a HR team be much more effective in servicing the diversity of businesses that our company has actually invested in. So it's really a very interesting study because you can start on practically anywhere where the client starts.
Sounds to me that some of this work has quite a significant magnitude if we talk about cultural change. So would you understand yourself or your work more of that of a coach? So do you work alone? Do you work in small teams? Do you work in big teams, facilitating cultural change? What's the typical work you're doing?
Right. I think actually with culture change, as an outsider, as an external consultant, you cannot actually have that much impact without working with the internal team. So my first obvious thing is the client, and the client, as we know, fundamental OD question: who's the client? And actually, the client is your CEO or the top organization man who employs you and sees a need for the change. So, example, I'm working at the moment with an international bank in Malaysia, and the CEO wants to drive a much more collaborative culture in his company. He also wants to stem the tide of resignations because talent is scarce. It's a very, the supply of really good talent is very difficult with depth. And I work essentially to build the HR team up because you really have to have a very strong kind of partnership. So it's the partnering with the CEO and building HR's credibility with the CEO. And then from there, the senior leadership team. So it's really a matter of the phase approach. But there's no way that the outside one person can actually do it all. And yes, there is a combination of, coaching. There's a combination of design to facilitate, whatever sessions that's required to open up and launch this program. And then there's, of course, the follow-through with different providers providing talent development programs which are aligned to the strategy that they've embarked on.
Good. So if we think about the session you and John will be giving in Berlin, what do you think is the one thing that you want people to remember or to take away from that session?
Well, first, I would love to have them, have fun with it. And the second thing is I really want them to feel that they're all part of a learning community and that, we all face organizations and us, as partnerships, issues and challenges which have universal, content which are quite common, but at the same time, diversity. I think at the end of the day, it's really about managing paradoxes. That's the key takeaway. And the paradox is really, on the one hand, you've got universal human issues, issues of leadership, organizations, etc. Yet there is this diversity that you cannot ignore the cultural context. And therefore, the solutions have got to be very much customized. And so for me, it's really about having fun and, really looking at our own ability to adapt to situations. So it's really about adaptation, it's about agility, two things.
Thank you so much. And knowing you and John, I'm sure that we will have lots of fun with your session. Eliza, thank you so much for that rich interview and looking so much forward to seeing you soon in person in Berlin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Holger, very much.